Hey YouTube, this is my video review and kind of first impression tour of the Fujifilm X10. This is replacing my Canon S90 that I had for about 2 years. S90 was a good camera, very reliable, of course small, much smaller than this, much more pocketable. But a few things were wearing me on it. It was kind of hard to use. It's very small, didn't have any direct controls. The ring around the lens was a nice concept, but at least on my particular copy, it had a really junky, loose feel to it. It didn't, and I changed apertures, kind of like, ugh, that's not good. Yeah, it's a good camera, kind of slow autofocus, only VGA movies, no zooming, no focus during shooting movies. 0.9 frames per second. And it's a good camera and it came out, but now, the world has moved on and I had a little bit of extra money to spend, especially after I sold my iPod Touch, my S90, and one of my zoom lenses for my 30D. Actually selling all three of those things pretty much paid for this camera. Yeah, what drew me to the X10? I liked how all the controls, of course, are right there on your hand. At hand, it even has a dedicated white balance button. That's something you won't even find on most DSLRs now. The build quality is it's beautiful. It's a really beautiful camera. It's all metal, real minimalistic in the front. It doesn't even have a Fuji logo. I love the really fast lens, f2.8, even on telephoto, and then f2 at wide angle. The manual zoom, of course, is something that really sets it apart. Go from 28 to 112, really smooth. It feels like a high-end, Canon L series lens. Fast autofocus. The macro mode, you can get super close. LCD looks good. You have the optical viewfinder if you need it, but it doesn't have any focus confirmation or any information in it whatsoever. So it's good for like high depth of field street shooting, that kind of thing. Mainly at a distance, because the parallax effect will kind of hurt your composition at close ranges. Yeah, I'm a little OCD about keeping this thing clean, and I'll get to that later because I might be returning it. Anyways, I like the high ISO, the EXR mode, and yeah, the EXR, especially the EXR DR 400 dynamic range expansion, is really cool. It basically, if you've ever done HDR photography, you get the wider dynamic range, but with this, it's all in one shot. You can shoot, motion scenes, and it'll have the great dynamic range. It uses half the pixels to expose normally. The other 6 megapixels, it'll shut them off halfway through the exposure, just basically underexpose them. Uses that to pull down the highlights, like the skies. If you're shooting, you have clouds, the white clouds won't be all blown out. You'll be able to get the subtle grays and the blue of the sky. If you're in a shadowy place, like I took it hiking at Lost Maple State Park near San Antonio, and I was in this cave, and I was amazed because I was able to properly expose the cave, dark cave, and get the blue sky right outside the cave. I just could not believe that I got that shot out of this camera with no processing. It's just incredible. And then the high ISO, using that reduced pixel count 6 megapixel mode, looks great. Like, I did some back-to-back comparisons, like shooting at full res 12 megapixels and downsizing versus using the 6 megapixel with the signal to noise enhancement, whatever it is. And you actually do get more detail in the 6 megapixel shots using the pixel binning, which is what the EXR does. I'd say at 1600 and especially 3200 you see that advantage. Maybe at 800 it kind of starts to level out a bit and you might appreciate the 12 megapixel detail. But yeah, really fantastic. Skin tones look great. Colors look so much more like my 30D versus my S90, which kind of always looked kind of artificial. The saturation was kind of off. kind of flat. This allows you to actually get a little bit more depth of field control than you get from most compact cameras. The sensor is slightly larger than the S90s, and the lens, especially on the long end, is almost 3 stops faster, so that helps. One caveat of that, though, is the Canon S90 did have noticeably better image stabilization. They both have lens-based systems, but Canon has, I mean, they've been doing that since, I want to say like 2007 on their compacts. Fujifilm was a little bit late to the game, then they got into sensor shift, and now lens shift. So, I mean, it's still helpful. I've been able to get shots down to about half a second, but not with nearly the consistency that the Canon gave me. So that's a bit of a bummer, but even at 12 megapixel full resolution, this has a noticeable detail and noise advantage over the S90, which already was so good when it came out. And that's based purely on JPEGs, because I shot RAW with the S90 like 5 times, and this thing, I don't even have the Adobe ACR update yet. No one does. It's not available, but it will be, and then I'll be able to shoot RAW in my CS5 and use all that. Okay, now we'll get to the bad news, and this is really disappointing. This camera has, all these X10s have an issue with rendering specular highlights, which is basically like a sharp, reflective, pinpoint of light. Where you have a lot of contrast. So a shot where you'd have like the sun reflecting off chrome, you'd have a little, in this case, a 14-point starburst, because it has 7 aperture blades. That's the way the diffraction works. Which should be a little starburst, and it turns into this perfectly round white hole punch look. It's just like a sphere. It's really distracting and strange looking to see that in a photograph. And sometimes you can kind of work around it with the lighting to minimize the effect, and sometimes you can't. Like if you're shooting, I love shooting long exposure, low ISO shots at night, like 15, 30 seconds. Maybe with some water, you get the kind of the neutral density filter look with the water blurring out, smoothing, kind of looking like mist, and lights off in the distance, or little star points. With this, you just get, it looks like someone took a bingo marker and just stamped all over. It looks really bad, and that's a situation where you can't get around it. So that was really disappointing when I discovered that in my shots, and I looked on the dpreview.com Fujifilm talk forum and saw how a lot of people were having problems with that too. Luckily, Fujifilm was contacted about it, and they're now aware of the issue, and they've released their official statement. Half of it's buck passing, like, oh, all cameras do this. No, they don't. They do not do this, not to this degree. So they also said, we'll try to fix it with firmware, and it'll be out sooner rather than later. I bought this camera off Amazon, and thanks to their very generous holiday return policy, I'll be able to return it for a full refund until January 31st, as long as it's in new condition with all the packing materials. So I'm keeping it really nice until then, and hopefully the firmware update will be out by then. And hopefully it'll work. And if it does fix the issue, or if it doesn't, I'll probably make another video letting you know what happened with that. And if nothing happens until then, I'm going to have to send it back and just use my Canon 30D for a while. And if they have to make a hardware change and they fix it, they'll do that, and I'll be first in line to buy it again, because it's really a phenomenal camera. Besides that issue, it really offers some really special things. In fact, at one point, I even thought about selling my 30D, because the only advantage it really holds now is the depth of field control for portraits with that 60 f2.8 lens. High ISO, this thing is actually cleaner. It shoots at 7 frames per second versus 5. So, dynamic range, it's a good camera. So hopefully Fujifilm will fix that white dot issue. WDS, white dot syndrome, I think, is kind of what what they're calling it. If they do, I'll keep you updated. Thanks for watching.